Welcome to the Choose Hard podcast, the one and only fitness and nutrition podcast that goes way beyond just training and nutrition and helps you transform your body and your mind. Now, today's podcast guests, two of them, are different than any guests that we have had on the show, and I am really, really excited about it. I cannot wait for you to listen to this episode. Today, I'm talking to two farmers, a cattle rancher and a dairy farmer. They own large farms, one in Nebraska and one in New Mexico, and produce cattle, beef, and dairy. And it is a very, very interesting conversation because as I get into Tara and Natalie's stories, we learn a lot more about what sustainable agriculture really is. We learn about big farms and what makes the difference between a farm that is not properly raising animals and producing the food that you and I consume versus the farms that are doing it right, the sustainable farms that are family owned for generations on generations and truly care about the animals and the farming and the food that ends up on your plate and my plate. They also have a podcast called Discover Agriculture, Discover Ag. You can find that on any platform, and they have social media profiles, both of them, as well as one for the podcast, all of which phenomenal content and just really drop a lot of somewhat humorous at times, but also information based content that really educates you on everything agriculture. So if you're interested in the quality of your food, the quality of the farming that produced your food, or just curious on how to identify what food you should stay away from and what practices on the level of the farmer all the way to the packager who is delivering the meat or the dairy that you are consuming, this is a great podcast for you. I think you're going to learn a ton. I think you're going to laugh at some of the questions I ask as somebody who knows nothing about that world, but I think I did a good job at being a nobody in that world so that you, a nobody in that world, can listen, learn, and educate yourself on how to source your food better and eat better for a better, longer, and healthier life. All right, without any further ado, let's talk to Natalie and Tara.
The greatest things in life all start with a challenge.
You must accept that everything is hard before it gets easy.
Everything you want in life begins with a hard path.
So nice to meet everyone. My name is Natalie, and I am a cattle rancher from Nebraska. So my husband and I have beef cattle here. We're in the central part of the state. I grew up in agriculture, actually grew up on a cattle ranch in Montana. And so agriculture and the beef industry has been a part of my life for obviously a very, very long time. I will say when I graduated, I did not plan to remain in agriculture, so I didn't have dreams of growing up and being a cattle rancher myself. I actually got my degree in pharmacy. And so for a long time, I was practicing as a full-time pharmacist, living in a bigger city in Montana. And then all of that kind of changed. I got brought back to my family ranch when I met and married my husband. And so he's what brought me to Nebraska. He was ranching here, and he kind of brought me full circle back to living on a ranch, raising my kids on a ranch, having my income, derived from ranching, all the things.
I love it. And Tara?
Yeah, so there's some definitely similarities, but also differences. So I am a dairy farmer in New Mexico. I dairy farm with my husband and his family, but I grew up on a dairy farm. So I'm a fifth generation dairy farmer. My husband is also a fifth generation dairy farmer. And similar to Natalie, when I left for college, I didn't necessarily see myself coming back. I got my degree in environmental science. I was taking my LSAT. I was I wasn't dating my husband or anything at the time. So I just did not necessarily see myself coming back to my family farm. And then obviously, as life would have it, ended up marrying my husband and moving to his family farm that is literally just down the road from my family farm, and currently raising our two daughters here on the dairy. And yeah, like we said, there's a lot to get into. It feels like everyone is kind of talking about food and where their food comes from. So very excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give you guys a little bit of context, just so you know, the type of people that listen to this, and I think hopefully that'll help you just gear what you're talking about in the right way. But I run a online fitness and nutrition coaching company. And so the majority of the people listening to this podcast are either A, coaches themselves, trainers and nutritionists, or B, they are people trying to continue being fit or finally get fit. It's always about training, nutrition, and mindset. So we are definitely people interested in food and being healthier and making the right choices. And a lot of the people listening, I think, are going to get a lot of value out of just learning more about where our food comes from, why some of the stuff you guys do is important for us to know as consumers. For people who don't have the farm down the street, to let them know it's important to go find local sources of certain types of foods and different things like that. And yeah, so I have a long list of questions, so we'll see if we'll get through all these. But I'd love to hear, the first few are going to be kind of for both of you guys, so we can kind of just go back and forth, because I'm sure you guys have similarities in this like before, but maybe different opinions in different backgrounds slightly. But what makes you so passionate about this? Both of you guys maybe grew up around it, but you came back. So obviously this wasn't the plan necessarily. Why did it become the plan again outside of marriage? And I understand how that can obviously influence a lot of our choices. I'm married and have a daughter. But what makes you so passionate about it still today?
Yeah, I think that actually going away and thinking I wasn't coming back gave me such great perspective. It's funny, when I say I went away, and I didn't hang out with a single person that was a farmer. I went to a larger college, and it was so funny though, because here I was trying to get away from it. And I swear every time I could be at a frat party and someone would be like, what do you do? And, I'd be like, my dad's dairy farmer. And then the rest of the time they would have 1,000 questions about their food and about milk and about dairy and what that looked like. And I think that was a running theme through a lot of my college, is once people found out my family was farmers, they had so many questions. And you alluded to a lot of people love food. A lot of people want to have, be healthy and nutrition and all these things, but there's this giant gap. And I think with that gap, there's a ton of misinformation right now on social media. And so people genuinely just have questions and want to get those questions answered. And so I think those years apart and answering people's questions, talking with people, showed me exactly how deep my roots run for agriculture, and how much I love it, and how it was always going to be a part of who I am and what my family did. And so I feel by the time I came back to the farm, it was a very natural progression, because it's just something there's a saying that it's not just a job, it's a way of life. And it's a very cliche to say that, but it's absolutely true. I mean, we live right here on our farm. Every piece of our life is integrated into the farm. And so, yeah, it really takes hold of you and doesn't always want to let go. And so definitely drew me back into agriculture. Professionally, even though I got my degree in environmental science, I actually ended up working in the dairy environmental space for more than 10 years, just because it ended up being such a natural fit to be able to come back into agriculture. So while I did, marry the dairy farmer, I did choose then also to be how do I want to be involved in this piece of agriculture? And so that's a little bit about for me. I'll let Natalie jump in.
I think what's interesting about, kind of this disconnect we're talking about is you really aren't aware of it. So growing up, you only know what you know, what you've been exposed to. I always joke that you do things in your family that you think are normal, and then you grow up and you do them in front of friends and they're like, wait, what are you doing? And you're like, oh, I thought everyone did this. And so for me, that was growing up. I grew up in a smaller, more rural area in Montana, probably considered to most people tuning in. And I didn't have a ton of friends who were, quote unquote, in agriculture. They weren't doing production agriculture, raising food, but they were all around, it was all around you. So it wasn't unfamiliar to me. And I honestly just never realized that people didn't know a farmer, didn't know a rancher, didn't drive down the road and see cows on their way to school. That wasn't part of their everyday life. And so kind of echoing what Tara said, you grow up and you leave and you start realizing the questions people have, or you join social media and you start realizing the things that people share that they think is true. And you kind of go, that's not true. Or wait, someone thinks that. And so then there's kind of just this natural pullback to be why isn't anyone correcting this? Or why isn't anyone talking about this? Or I'm happy to answer that question. And so you kind of just get slowly brought back into it with social media. I think, my life would look a whole lot different. I'd probably still being I'd still being a practicing pharmacist if social media didn't exist, because what we do now is obviously online. And so I think that played a large role for me of being able to share for us, obviously. The interesting thing too about our podcast, Discover Ag, it kind of has the same origins. Tara and I actually went to this business trip. We were both separate. We were going as friends, but not for a combined anything. Tara was doing a lot of keynote speaking in the dairy sustainability space. And I was doing kind of some different things on, influencing and brand partnerships online. And so we went to this business retreat in the heart of Nashville with a bunch of other women who were running 6-figure, 7 businesses, had nothing to do with agriculture. And we were out doing bonding and all these different things. And everyone just kept asking us about food. They'd ask us about this. They'd ask us about that. And we were like, I think there's something here where if we really wanted to talk about food, we could make this our online thing.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think it's funny too, because you guys are going to laugh. I'm going to sound like such a city boy or a poser. So I live in Washington State. And I used to live in the city, and as I met my wife and then we had a kid, we just kept moving further and further and further away from the city. And so there's a dairy farm literally down the street from my gym and my podcast studio and everything. And so I drive around all this stuff now. And of course, I've watched like Yellowstone and stuff. And there's something about the farm and that life and seeing these guys when I'm driving by. It's so appealing. It's so attractive. It's so peaceful. It's so like, so you said, it's a lifestyle. It's not a career. I could totally see that because it is just, I don't know, there's something about it, even though I know nothing about how to do what they do. It is very, very appealing. And I think that I'd love your guys' opinion on this. It really in just like a very generalized way, because I think people need to hear this advice. I remember being in school as a trainer and nutritionist and having to watch a documentary about like fast food and McDonald's, like all this stuff. And you see a type of, I don't even know if you would call that agricultural farming or whatever, but like mass food production that paints such a disgusting picture that it can freak a lot of people out. And I remember seeing people like go vegan because they'd see stuff like this. And I would love to shed light on what it really looks like in both of your guys' worlds, because I know that being a vegan is not healthier. Like, just to put it bluntly, like I think there's a lot of value in animal products that people are missing out on. And we see it all the time as nutritionists. And especially when somebody comes to us and they are that way because they're trying to be healthier or trying to lose weight, we try to steer them away from that if we can, because if it has nothing to do with your religion or anything like that, then that's not a healthier way to go. But I do think that sometimes what is seen on social media and these documentaries and stuff can just freak people out. And they see that and they run away from it.
Yeah, on our podcast, we actually did some like debunkings. It was probably like a year plus ago. We did like a summer series where we debunked a ton of the Netflix, like Game Changers and all of those with like the misinformation they had. But, in the current like food movement, I feel like there's a lot of talk about like big food. And I always think of them as like the PepsiCos, the Coca-Colas of the world, kind of like, the food that's actually like ending up in a package at the grocery store. And then there's also like the big ag part of the conversation. And sometimes those are like the people that you think of, whether it be like John Deere or even like a Cargill. A lot of people have heard of, Cargill and like the big packers. And then I feel like people forget about the other like subset, and that's like farmers and ranchers, like the ones that are just out on the land. And I think the piece that's missing there is like, we're actually a larger dairy farm by like certain standards. It depends where you're at in the country and geographically and all those things, but we'd be like a larger farm. And I feel like when I get online, I'll see things that are like, oh, large, factory farms. And it's funny because I'm like, I live 150 steps from my milking barn, right? Like, I'm like, I don't know how much more like we could be here, our family raising our kids. Like, our backyard is close-up pens of our cows. And yet I think, again, just because people have never been there, never seen anything, they hear these words thrown around, whether it's like, again, the big food, factory farming, and they just like paint this picture in their own brain. Or maybe there is videos that encompass that as well, and documentaries like you said. But when you really start like breaking it down, I think that day-to-day practices on farms and who's on the farms, who owns them, looks very different than the picture that social media and documentaries paint for it.
What separates that? Like the big, what you would consider big farms and big mass production that maybe isn't the way that you would do it, isn't the best way, versus yours? Because look, I'm an entrepreneur. Big is not bad, and we all want to be bigger, more successful, produce more, and like especially if we're doing it in our own way. So what would you say are like, maybe from your lens, this is what separates us? This is what is different and what matters.
Yeah, so I'll start with dairy, and I'll let Natalie jump in because I think the beef industry is really cool compared to the dairy industry, some of how they're separated out. For me, I just like the vast majority of farms. I think it's something like 98% of farms in the United States, dairy farms, are family owned and operated. So it's just like, to me, it's like overwhelmingly it is family farms. And even our farm that's bigger, if you break that down, like it's my husband and like our family, he has 5 brothers. All of them are involved on the dairy. His dad is still involved on the dairy. So when you start like breaking down how many like owner operators there are per like cows, like it starts like breaking down that you're like, it's not a big corporation. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think that there's obviously going to be different scales and different types of protein. I think another one, like when you get into poultry, it's more vertically integrated. You think about like the Tysons of the world. That looks very different than like beef and dairy. Like every piece of the food industry is a little bit different. But overwhelmingly, like family owned and operated. It's when you go up to that food production scale is where I think that some of the changes start happening.
I'll try and organize my thoughts here because I have a lot to add in here. But I think this is honestly what makes the conversation so hard to talk about, and why it's great to have podcasts and long form conversations like this, because you can't fit this into a 9-second reel online. And when you try and fit this into a 9-second on reel line, you're actually doing a big disservice to a lot of the facts and the information that's needed. But I do think that, going to the complexity of this, like Tara already mentioned, there is poultry, there is pork, there is dairy, there is beef. And then you get into the vegetable, and then you get into the grains, you get into corn and soy, you get into, almonds. Like people lump all of agriculture into one. They lump factory farming all into one. They lump big farms and small farms into one. And it's very, very, very diverse. And every industry is going to look completely different. And even proteins, we all get lumped into one. But the beef industry is completely ran different than pork and chicken. So when we try and have these conversations about like, what is big, what is bad, what has gone too far, it's like, it's really hard to just give a blanket statement, even a broad stroke brush to even accurately to paint that. And then you have people's perception and, personal, I guess, beliefs of what big and small is. Like, so to you would maybe go view Tara's dairy. We'll just keep with that, example. And you'd be like, cool, like that I've actually pictured. That's kind of what I think of like mid-range. That's great. And someone else could be like, that's tiny. Like, I'm so glad that that's, what the dairy farm is. And then someone else could look at that number and be like, that's way bigger. Like, I want to go to a 10 dairy farm. I want someone who has 1 milk cow. And so there's also this like personal preference and perception that skews what even, going to your original question, like what is the line between big and small? I feel like that's such a personal answer to it. The other thing I'll say is like speaking, to myself in the beef industry, it can be a little frustrating to have the number game played, or the whole conversation of, what is big and what is okay, because we are so different than a lot of the other industries when you're talking, again, the animal space of agriculture. Pork is vertically integrated, chicken is vertically integrated, and dairy runs, a little bit different in its own capacity. The beef industry is segmented. So what my husband and I do, as a ranch here in Nebraska and most ranches across the United States, we are the beginning portion of the beef industry, and that will be entirely family owned and operated. I mean, when people want to talk about big ag and big factory farms, I'm like, you will not find that in what is called the cow-calf sector of the beef industry. It is family ranches. The average size is 43. So you're looking at 43 cows as the average size across the nation. The beef industry is like an inverted triangle. So it starts out really big and broad at the top with families like mine. And then as you go down to the point is usually referred to as the processors, which is the big 4. And if you want to call that a monopoly and you want to call that big ag, I'm totally okay with it, because it is. It's 4 companies that literally process and own 85% of the beef industry when it comes to packing. Above that is the middleman between, ranches like my husband and I's and the Cargills, that, the processors of the world. They're the feedlots and the backgrounders when you're talking about conventional, quote unquote, conventional beef. And that will still be family owned and operated, but you're going to get closer to, larger scale operations. And so again, it's just really, really hard to be like, here's where I draw the line, and here's where ag has remained okay, and here's where it crosses the line, because it's just much more vast and I think different between all the different sectors than the average consumer even realizes.
I have a few questions on this. One, just real quick and simple for listeners, what do you mean by vertically ran?
Sure. Sorry. It's again so hard. You get talking and then you're like, shoot, I should explain that, but I need to stay on track. Vertically integrated means we'll stick with chicken and Tyson as an example. It's very common names. Tyson owns everything. So they own the chicken, they own the egg, they own, obviously the chicken breast when it's done.
Top to bottom.
Top to bottom. It's vertically integrated. So usually the farmer is contracted and, not working for Tyson is like probably the appropriate legal way to say it, but like to paint the picture in the mind of the listener. Tyson brings on the farmer, and the farmer's job is to just grow the chicken, and they're getting paid to do that. Like, they don't own the animal. Whereas my husband and I, we're independent, right? So the beef industry is not vertically integrated. Like, Cargill doesn't I've never talked to Cargill in my life. They have no control over what I'm doing on my farm. They have, their fingers are not in the pot of what's going on in the beef sector. So it's segmented. It is not vertically owned. We own the beginning animal. It gets sold to the feedlot. The feedlot owns it. They sell it to the packer. The packer owns it. They sell it to the consumer.
And on the dairy side, we are probably more similar to beef, that we like own our own animal, we own our farm, we own the land, we own all the equipment, everything is ours. And then we're actually a part of a co-op with other dairy farms, and then we market our milk together to like different processors. So people that are going to bottle the milk or make cheese. And then our co-op deals with like, the cheese processor or whatever and sells the milk on our behalf.
Well, and I think like just as somebody who is a consumer and learning, and even for the listeners, it's almost easier to understand the beef side because you can go against chicken or against pork or against whatever, versus dairy. People are probably struggling to figure out, well, like what is the other, and this may be complete, and this is a perfect example of social media. This might be complete bullshit. I don't know. This is something I saw on Instagram and it was compelling, and it was like basically like sticking up for farms, right? And it was talking about how, a vegan, like basically for almond milk, the amount of like farming that kills insects and critters and stuff like that for farming almonds to create soy milk and stuff, compared to like how much just one cow can feed people, was just alarming. And I think when people think almond milk and, a vegan or vegetarian source, it's like, oh, this is better for the environment. Like there's no animals involved. And people forget about how important critters and insects and all these things are for the land and soil. So I'd love if you can touch on that briefly as a dairy farmer. Is that accurate? Is that something that is I don't know, something smart for consumers like myself to actually like read and learn?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting conversation because I think for a long time we had a big vegan movement. I'm sure you've seen it. I think we are kind of like coming out of it, but like in the thick of it, yeah, it was like, oh, you have to have almonds. Almonds like not only save the cows, but they save the planet. And not to pick on almonds, I have plenty of almond producer friends, but like there's just different metrics you can look at for everything. Like I don't know how many times I've seen the graph that's like, oh, 1 gallon of almond produces 50% less greenhouse gas emissions than a gallon of milk. And you're like, okay, but that's not like comparing apples to apples. Like you're comparing 1 gram of protein in a glass of almond milk compared to 8 grams of protein in cow's milk. Like what metric do you want to compare by? Or even like, let's talk water use. Let's talk, like the list goes on and on of all the things you could look at. I'm actually going to let Natalie jump in because I think one of the really cool things like about the beef sector where Natalie's at is actually grazing cattle out on pasture. That's a big piece of the beef industry. And talking about exactly what you're saying, like I've been out to Natalie's ranch in Nebraska. I mean, it's, you're seeing all sorts of animals, different types of grasses growing, tons of critters, like all of that piece of it too. And so it's like, it's so much more complex than one metric in and one metric out. And that's just I think that's how our brains work, is we want it to be like, this means this. And in reality, I actually heard a woman speak one time that said, tell me what you care about and I'll tell you how to eat, because there isn't one like silver bullet for what you're going for. Like I always think about almond milk. If you're trying to cut calories and you still like love the idea of like a glass of milk, then like maybe almond milk is right for you. I'm not the one that's there to make that decision for you. Or if you're worried about, what would be a good example? Like grass-fed beef or, organic milk or whatever it is. All of these things are different gives and takes within the food system that ultimately get your product. But so I hope that kind of answers your question.
I'll let you jump in too, Natalie, but I just wanted to say that it's a really good way of answering it, because I do think, same thing with electric cars versus gas cars. People are like, we got to go all electric. No, you don't. Like, that's not the answer either. Like, there's always a middle ground, and the give or take is, I think, a really, really good way to look at that. So I love that answer.
Yeah, I think there's something that's kind of happening with food, and I think we're shifting out of it a little bit. I feel like we're entering like a really cool landscape for food where people are just kind of understanding it more and realizing it's more bigger picture and just, bigger, better conversations around it. But a lot of it isn't an either or. So people will be like, well, is it conventional or organic? Which one should I buy? And it's like, well, they're not mutually exclusive. Like you can, they both have like values and benefits to them. Again, going to Tara's point of like, tell me what's important, or like what you're looking to, solve with your dollar financially, or what you're looking for like environmentally. Like a lot of these conversations aren't either or. It's like, it's even nice in America having, the entire options. But speaking to like what we were just coming off of, agriculture and the whole conversation of like environment, is a very, very big conversation. And we do love to break it down. It just doesn't work that way. I like to talk about, like, for kind of a concrete example, like grass finished beef versus grain finished beef. Grain finished beef actually have like a lower carbon footprint because you are finishing them faster. So like if you wanted to go toe to toe with someone, you could find like carbon metrics to show that, like, the feedlot beef is going to have a lower greenhouse gas emission than the grass finished beef. But I don't believe in that, because I believe in having a grazing animal that is, out at part of the natural ecosystem and part of the life cycle that, a feedlot animal does not do to, does not, offer that a grass, an animal out grazing and finished in that manner does. And so there's just these really intricate, smaller conversations to have when it comes to the answer of, is almond milk better than milk? Or is a grass finished beef better than grain finished? It's like, again, there's just not like one answer for it. There's a lot of things to consider.
Well, and I think that's what's cool about you guys creating content, and doing what you're doing. And it's the same reason why I try to, I've been doing this for so long. I took the opposite of the sexy marketing route when I first started, because I don't do quick fixes. I don't do fat loss phase, like diets and fads and pills. It's like I was just creating really good educational content so people could actually learn this stuff, And I think, speaking on organic, for example, if somebody were to ask you, should I go organic or not? I know it depends on different factors.
I know we're like the worst people to give answers.
Like, can you give it to me straight now?
I get it. Trust me. I'm the same way with my category and topic. I'm the same way. It depends. But it's funny to me, because if you asked a normal person who asked you that, if you said, well, first, what makes something organic? They would have no idea. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I don't even feel comfortable answering that question fully to you right now, as you guys doing what you do. And I would love you to shed some light on it. But I think my point is that if people don't understand what you guys are doing in those starting stages, they really can't even figure out, mm-hmm. what answer matters most to them. Like what they care about, they don't even know.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
So if you guys want to touch on what makes something organic, that would be,
yeah,
we can.
Yeah. Do you want to take it, Tara? Yep.
Yeah, I'll start. So I feel like the biggest thing is that, in my mind, when I think about organic, it is not necessarily a health claim. It is a farming practice. And I think that's actually the biggest misconception people go into the grocery store. It is truly whatever product it is how it is farmed. And there are certain requirements for how it's farmed. And then that's what gives it the USDA certified stamp of approval for organic. So in the animal world, like whether it be beef cattle, dairy cattle, a lot of times it means absolutely no antibiotics. The animal cannot have antibiotics at any point in its life. For both also beef and dairy, there's requirements of how long they're grazing out at pasture is one of the requirements. And then they keep, going out from there. The type of feed they have to have has to be organic. They can't, if you're a row crop farmer and you're organic, you can only use organic pesticides and fertilizers, because that's another thing that's a misconception. A lot of people think organic means pesticide free, and that's not what it means. It means only organic pesticides, only organic fertilizers. And so it just keeps going down from there. And at the end of the day, if you're comparing organic milk to regular milk, there's not a ton of nutritional differences. There is some minor ones. There's some things with the omegas that are a little different. Although I'm a pretty firm believer, if you want to get omega-3s and milk, even organic milk, it's probably not the place to get it. There's probably better sources in other places. But there is some micro level nutrient differences, but that's about as far as our science is currently going. I mean, when you look at the actual grams of protein and those kind of things, it's very similar. But again, it goes back to if you're choosing organic and you're I feel firm that animals shouldn't receive antibiotics, then that's the milk you should choose. If that's not something you feel strongly about, then maybe that's not the milk for you to choose.
Now, does it cost money on your guys' end to get that stamp of approval?
Yes, getting organic approval is very expensive. A lot of it is admin, a lot of paperwork, a lot of keeping track of your records. Obviously, there is more also money tied into some of the practices you have to do, that if you have to have cattle for a dairy farm out grazing, you have to have the land for them to graze. There's some other technical, but I would say a lot of it too is just administration of keeping your certification up to date with USDA.
We actually talked about this on the podcast last week because there's a reel kind of going, semi-viral that kind of a food influencer, food activist was saying, like, if it's organic, don't buy, or if it's not organic, don't buy it. And so we were kind of talking about this reel. She was saying, like, Trader Joe's is junk. There's nothing organic there, so don't go there. And we had this conversation that it's actually really expensive for people to get labeled as organic. And so there are a lot of people who are either practicing organic, to what Tara was saying, like on-farm practices, or doing other really cool things in, like, quote unquote regenerative agriculture space, but they don't go to the means and the lengths to actually be certified organic because it's too costly for them, or they don't see the ROI on getting the label of organic, when it comes to how they're actually, like, maybe putting their produce or their goods, that market avenue. And so just pushing organic label blindly for something like that, like, does not make sense. There's a lot of people who are producing really, really good food that would even be, closely similar, that just aren't getting the organic label.
Well, and that's like, I can think of, it's actually on the same road that my facility's on, is a local butcher that we go to for our meats and everything. They don't have organics stamped all over everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of off in the boonies and, like, there's not, a lot. So I'm not surprised by it, but that never made me second guess it, but I could totally see that. But I can hold their steak next to, something that's not the best, or their chicken next to, like, a Foster Farms chicken just sitting there, or a Tyson or whatever the brand is. And you can see the difference, you know, and it doesn't matter if it's organic or not.
I was just to say, it kind of takes, I don't know if you want to go on this tangent, but it kind of brings us to, like, food labels. And I'm not the biggest fan of food labels. I think they started in, like, a really good place. Like, obviously we entered an era where people were moving further and further away from farms and ranches. Like, you no longer had an uncle or a grandparent or a parent that was farming. And so it was like, okay, how do we help people better shop in the grocery store? And so they started out with, like, really good intent. Like, oh, we'll provide these labels so people have options and can understand their food. And now there just isn't a ton of regulation in a lot of them. They're not being enforced. A lot of it is, like, marketing words, natural, family raised. Like, those aren't, the FDA isn't going through a family raised, protocol to assure, like, there are no standards for that. And so, food labels have kind of moved into this marketing and greenwashing era where it's like, you're paying extra money for a label that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And I'm not saying organic isn't regulated, it's definitely regulated, but it brings us into that conversation that, like, marketing has definitely taken over labels, and a lot of it is, like, aimed at, like, consumers' emotions. And to exactly what you said, you don't need a label to get good quality food. Like, there is good quality food raised. You can go to a farm ranch, you can go to your local butcher, you can go to a grocery store even, and still get good quality food that necessarily hasn't been labeled something specific.
So I want to ask on how we find that. But before I do, something important for you to know about is the Tailored Trainer app. This app was a project that I started years ago as a way to deliver science-backed programs that were proven to be effective by countless case studies of happy clients for dirt cheap. Yes, dirt cheap. See, my coaching company helped countless clients get great results through their diets. But there were so many clients leaving easily achievable results left on the table simply because they couldn't afford to also pay a trainer, or because they thought they could do it on their own. So back in 2017, I created a login on my website that would allow people to access all of my training plans for just $29 a month. And the people who paid this low cost fee were dramatically seeing better results from the training they were doing in the gym. And they were telling me that these programs were worth far more money than I was charging them for. So what would any smart businessman do? Raise the price, right? Wrong. That's not what I did. In fact, I started investing every single dollar back into this project so that I could create my own software and my own app to make the results people were getting even better. And now, for the same price as it was all those years ago, you can access all my programs inside of an app that actually logs your progress, guides your performance, plans your schedule, and even teaches you how to do each and every lift properly. But don't take my word for it. Go test it out for yourself at no cost at all. Head over to thetailoredtrainer.com or simply search The Tailored Trainer on Google Play or Apple App Stores, and you can download the app and start using this system completely free. All right, let's get back into the show. Going back to the inverted triangle that you had mentioned.
Yeah.
Is it because there's, like, it's insane that just 4 companies control all that at the top. Is there a way for people like myself, or should we even be doing this, to find somewhere in the middle like to go, or is that what the local butcher is? Like,
Yeah, that's exactly what the local butcher is. So when you're shopping directly from a rancher, on social media or like a butcher box, a lot of those like direct to consumer is what they'll be called a lot of times, because you are skipping, that certain portion of the triangle. If we're still like envisioning, our upside down triangle. Like I did, that's how I started actually on social media. I started a direct to consumer beef business. So instead of, my beef entering down to the feedlot and then to the packer and then to the consumer could go directly to me at the top of the triangle and get their beef directly from a farmer and rancher. So that when you are shopping from your local butcher, you are skipping that 85% of JBS, Cargill, why can't I think of the other
National.
two? National and one other that are in the beef industry that process. They're the bottleneck. They do all the processing for beef.
I will add too, like, it doesn't mean you have to be fearful of grocery store beef either. Like, I'm a person who loves to go to Costco and get like the giant, like prime rib, whatever, and like slice my own steaks. Like, if you have specific questions about your food, I think that going to your local butcher or direct to consumer beef is a great option, because you can just have that conversation one-on-one with a farmer or a rancher. But that doesn't necessarily mean the alternative is bad. Both Natalie and I's cattle at the end of the day, like, go into the conventional beef supply system.
one of the things that I feel like it's kind of been circulating what we're talking about, and I know you guys are big on this, and just looking through social media and stuff on your guys' pages, sustainable farming. I kind of want to like dive through some of those. And first, let's like, for everybody listening, what does that mean exactly? Like, what is the definition from you guys when you're talking about sustainable farming?
Yeah, so I think that's actually one of the things even about organic is people think it means like more environmentally friendly. And it kind of goes to the conversation Natalie said about like grain fed being actually a smaller carbon footprint. Organic is actually a larger carbon footprint because it takes more land and it takes, longer to finish the cattle, all that kind of thing, similar with organic. And so it gets into this very like nuanced conversation again. So I would say that the new word out there is like regenerative, right? We're seeing that everywhere, like regenerative agriculture. And I actually really like that. I like the idea of regenerative, because I think one of the things that's cool about regenerative is it isn't just like a check box yes or no. It's not just a stamp of approval. It's genuinely looking at like what makes sense for your industry in your area in your region. And then I think it's a spectrum. So there is people that are obviously very hardcore regenerative and have multi-species integration and just very much on that extreme end of regenerative. But at the same time, there are so many conventional, regular old farmers and ranchers out there that are doing some steps that are just like along the spectrum and getting better and better year after year. So our farm is absolutely a conventional dairy farm, and yet our entire barn is solar powered. So we have a solar farm on our dairy, and it powers our barns. We hope one day we'll get batteries and it'll be able to power more, but right now we are operational during the sunlight hours. And so like that, could be seen as like more regenerative. We're also minimal till. So we try not to till the land as little as possible. Again, that's like a regenerative process. We compost all of our manure on our farm and either use it on our farms or on local farms. We'll purchase it. Again, a regenerative practice. Like, so it's just like along the ladder kind of like we're continuing to try to get better and better year after year and like implement new management practices that we're seeing are working for either our area, our region, and our industry.
Yeah. So going back to what I just said, regenerative isn't like one of those labels. It's actually right. There isn't like a regenerative, label. Federation of the United States that is like, here's, you do A, B, C, D, and E, and you are now regenerative. And I think that's something that a lot of people probably don't know. They do probably think that it means like you have to do X, Y, and Z to be able to, to be called that or consider that. But it's not. It's like Tara said, it's kind of this idea or theme that essentially like in a woo-woo kind of answer that you are, taking less from the land and putting more back into it. So essentially you are making, a lot of it comes back down to soil health, which is kind of weird. I think a lot of consumers wouldn't be like, well, what's soil health have to do with the cow, or what's soil health have to do with the dairy cow? Like, why does that matter? But people who are in the regenerative perspective, believe that the soil health is what starts it all. And so as Tara mentioned, no tilling and animal grazing, a bunch of different things fall under that, where it's like, we are doing our most as, caretakers of the land to to build that soil back up, where you're not depleting it and taking from it continually as we're, growing food. So it's all about different practices to build up really, really healthy soil.
So I'm, again, somewhat ignorant to some of this stuff. So just caution before I say this.
You're
You're
stop
doing
apologizing.
great. Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, I'm not a farmer, so I want to get that out there. But thank you.
In case there's any confusion.
Yeah. So it's funny to me when people, I don't know, like, look, I'm just gonna be real. I'm in Washington State, so I hear this kind of crap all the time. And there's a lot of people who are really, really about the environment. And then if you were to like quiz them, they would not know anything about the environment. And so when I hear what you guys are talking about, I think of these funny conversations that I hear people have or I see, and it is what I think somewhat causes people to become vegan or vegan. They think, well, that's better for the environment. And what you guys are telling me you guys do on your farm sounds like it's way better for the environment. Like that sounds like organic to me, whether there's a label on it or not. I feel like that's the best thing I could ask for.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to vegan, I've always said that, like, if you want to choose to be vegan because you have an issue with an animal dying for your, protein, then I entertain some sort of conversation because, to your point, you can also back that up and say, well, when they are row cropping your soy, they're killing a lot of, microbes in the soil. They're killing a lot of bunnies. They're killing a lot of insects. Like, what's an animal to you? But big picture speaking, like if you don't like the idea of, a cow dying to feed you, then I think there is some conversation to the vegan choice. But if you're coming in from an animal welfare or a environmental welfare conversation, then I really have qualms with people who are, whether intentionally or accidentally, like you said. I mean, at the end of the day, people want to pick food that they feel like is good for the soil, is good for them. And unfortunately, it's confusing in today's, society to do that. And so whether you're intentionally choosing vegan because you think it's better for the land and the animals, or unintentionally, like I could get into a debate and a conversation about, like you said, the things that we're doing with the grazing cow is actually phenomenal for the soil and the land. My ranch is in, I'll just give this last little tidbit here and then wrap it up. I ranch in an area called the Nebraska Sandhills. A lot of people don't know about it, but if you're kind of an ecosystem nerd, then you definitely know about it. It is a huge portion of the state of Nebraska, and it is actually the world's largest intact ecosystem still to this date. And the reason it is that way is because of a grazing cow. You come out here and we don't have tractors. We're not, doing crops. I mean, obviously, portions of we're the corn state, right? So I'm talking about a different area. In the Nebraska Sandhills, it is rolling hills that is obviously sand for the soil, given the name. And the reason it is so intact and the reason it is thriving and beautiful and that you have a diverse amount of species and just this beautiful interconnected ecosystem is because we had a grazing animal on that land, and we still do to this day to complete that cycle of what is needed. And so there are a lot of positive when it comes to, quote unquote, being, as you said, environmentally friendly, that an animal is actually the better option.
I'm sure you both could speak to this too, and this is just the way my brain works, is I think of, like, it sounds funny, but I even think of like my dog and my daughter and how much she loves that dog. And if I was raising a family on a farm, I would imagine my kids would fall in love with the animals on the farm. And if
it is a problem,
and if it wasn't better for the world, better for the soil, the environment, if it wasn't better for our diets, like, I don't think the farmers who are raising and caring for these cattle with their families, I don't think they would hurt them by extracting dairy or hurt them by, selling them as beef. But you guys do it because it's better for everything.
No, I think that's such a good point. I mean, I get asked a lot, like, what milk do you buy at the grocery store, And I'm like, I feed my family whatever milk is the lowest price that week because I feel so strongly. Like, I know exactly what went into every step of producing that milk, getting it to the grocery store. There's some really cool facts, actually, that, like, milk gets to the grocery store within 48 hours, usually, of leaving the farm. So it's a super cool product. It's a very local product, actually. And I'm like, I don't have like qualms about any of the different types of milk on the shelf because I know the standards. I mean, whether it's organic or the store-bought brand, like it has to meet the same like quality assurance standards. And I know the care and attention that went into producing that milk, even if it's not on my farm. And so like, yeah, to your point, I'm not going to feed it to my kid. If I'm this intricately involved in it and I thought it was bad, like I'm not going to feed it to my kid. When reality, if you looked at my grocery cart when I leave, it's like predominantly, it's probably 75% dairy a lot of the times, and it's, I genuinely like feel that strongly about the product that we produce.
And one of the kind of funny things as a farmer rancher that we're like damned if we do and damned if we don't, if you were to answer that, like, well, can I feel good about, or if I was talking to a vegan and they're like, well, can I feel good about, eating a cow? I'm like, to your point, yes, I'm a good person, like I'm not out here abusing my animals. Like I am a decent person. My husband and I absolutely care for our land and animals in the best way. We have 3 sons who, we're hoping will come back and carry on this passion for, animals and land and this lifestyle. But that answer isn't enough, right? So they're like, well, no, give me more. Like, I don't believe that just because you're a good person, like give me the science, give me the numbers, give me the data. So then we enter into the conversation. We're like, well, we're still a business, right? So from a business standpoint, my beef, I have to sell that to a processor. I have technically not the processor, the backgrounder, I have the feedlot. If I have a bad cow, I'm not going to get a lot of money for that bad cow. So from like a business standpoint, it's not very economically smart of me to like raise a sick cow. It's not economically smart of me to not treat my animal like with the best practices I can so that I have the most healthy animal. Because I want top dollar for the animal we just raised. But then people hate hearing that. They're because like, oh, it's all business. Farmers and ranchers, they don't even care. Like they're down to the dollars, So it's like we try and walk this line of like, it's both. It's both to us. Like we care about what we're doing. My husband was going to go to dental school because all he wanted to do was have a job that got him enough money to raise cows on the side. Like that is how much he loves this lifestyle and wants to raise animals. So we're all in it for the lifestyle, but at the end of the day, we're running multi-million-dollar businesses. That's what farms and ranches are. Like the money in and the money out at the end of the day are multi-million-dollar businesses. And we run them to the best we can, raising the animals the best we can and treating the land the best we can so that we have a profitable business at the end of the day too.
Well, and like, I got to give you guys credit for this, unless I could be very unaware of it, but you guys are doing a good job of this because obviously I'm aware of you too, but there's not a lot of people in your shoes who are also putting it out there on social media and on podcasts like this, And so to your point, I'm sure there's a lot of, I gotta be honest, this is probably how I'd be. A lot of farmers who would just be like, I don't got time for this. They wouldn't even have the debate. They would just go back to doing what they do. But people need to know about it, and I think there is, you said it earlier, Tara, like there's a give and take for everything. I live in Washington where we're the evergreen state. So there's trees everywhere. And I've lived in beautiful communities that they cleared down a lot of land, and we get mountain lions and bears coming in people's backyards, and they're confused. And it's like, well, you took their home. What do you expect, But if you didn't, we wouldn't have these beautiful homes. And these people, there's a lot of business owners in this community that do amazing things for people. So like, it's,
yeah, it's such an interesting conversation, and like talking about that with like how people perceive like their like impact on different things, whether it be like environmentally or not. Like I always think about front lawns, and like we hear a lot of conversations about like fertilizer use and pesticide use on farms, and no one gives a second thought when they go down to their local, garden center and pick up fertilizer like Miracle Grow and, pesticides, grub killer, all these things, and like put it on their lawn. And and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are like, well, my lawn is only, however big. Fun fact, the largest irrigated land in the United States is front lawns. So that's the number one use of water is actually lawns. And so it's like all of those lawns add up to a lot of use, whether you're looking at water use, pesticide use, or fertilizer use. But a lot of times I think it's just easier to think about like terms of land use and natural resource use of like big farms are using it, and again not looking at like your housing development, right? Like of the land use changes for that. And so that I think it is a piece of the conversation that like I think probably one of the points of that we're getting to is like these are all nuanced conversations. It's just not that simple of just like right or wrong, or there's a lot of gray and there's just a lot of conversation to be had.
This I'm going to ask for a black and white answer, so unfortunately it's the opposite. Specific to beef, kind of going back to what I was saying with some of the stuff I've seen, in school and stuff, could you say that the chicken industry is worse than the beef industry?
Ooh,
As
we're going to get some rotten eggs thrown at us, Natalie.
It seems like it is.
It's
Just in my
different.
opinion.
The reason I want to give you a black and white answer, and the reason I can't is because I've actually never toured in person a chicken facility. And if I had, I'd feel a lot more comfortable being like, yes, no. Obviously, I'm very biased being a cattle rancher, that I think that, the way the cattle industry is structured and the way, a grazing animal is involved in ecosystem and the environment, I think it's pretty hard to compete with the beef industry. So they're very, very different. I think that's for a listener, I think that's something I want you to take home from this conversation. And then they can maybe do the research and decide, what that looks like for them, and, what's important to them. But birds, even the animals are completely different. One of the reasons why they are so different, vertically integrated versus not, is the lifespan of it. When you're talking chicken and getting it to the grocery store, you're talking like weeks, right, Tara? It isn't even, I don't even think it's months.
Yeah, and then
or maybe it's months, but
no, it's weeks. And like for a beef cow, how long is your life cycle?
Oh, well, we're looking at like you're looking at almost 2 years.
Yeah, and like a dairy cow, you're looking at like 8 years. You hope that dairy cow is on your dairy for 8 to 10 years. So you're talking about like a completely different animal. I think I have a way I want to answer this though. They are very different. I will say that. I'm not always the biggest fan of chicken. Like I always joke I don't eat yard bird. That's like my running joke. But I do. I totally eat it, and I eat plenty of eggs, and I buy it all from the grocery store. But I will say, I know I'm very familiar with dairy. I'm fairly familiar with beef, and I feel very, very comfortable about how our animals are raised and what our farms look like. I would hope at the end of the day, even though I haven't toured a chicken facility, I haven't toured, extensively hog facilities, there are still farm families behind those, and there are farmers behind those raising those, and they got to where they're at for a reason. So they made a choice every step of the way in our food system. We make a choice kind of leading us in one way or another. And usually it's always because we're trying to do something better. We're trying to improve the system. We're trying to improve the health of the animals. A lot of the reason that chickens are indoors is because they were trying to improve the health of the animals and reduce disease. And so I would like to think that if a chicken farmer was sitting here, they would also they, knowing all the ins and outs, would feel really comfortable about it as well, as strongly as Natalie and I feel about beef and dairy. I don't know if that helps.
It does. It's a good perspective. I think that from my viewpoint, I'll just be honest, like the beef and dairy, it just seems better. It seems cleaner. It seems like, pun intended, choose hard. It seems harder, and it seems like it takes more work. It takes longer, years and months and upkeep, and the animal's just way bigger. So obviously it's difficult in many ways. And I think a part of working hard and building something, there's a level of appreciation that comes along with that almost lends the farmers to probably treat everything with more care. There's no good TV shows and movies about chicken farmers. That's the thing.
Yellowstone goes chicken, goes poultry.
There's nothing like that. And I just think that, even, and again, just from things I had to watch even in school, there was never anything about dairy or beef. Honestly, it was always chicken and pork.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, no, Tara and I have made it a goal this year to try and get it on, a larger, like a chicken plant, and then also, like a chicken farm, so that we can have that firsthand experience to kind of, give our opinions about it, and then also compare, because we recently did just cover on the podcast the Netflix documentary Poisoned, and they really picked on the poultry industry. And when Tara and I were talking about that, that's one of the things we said, is that like I've toured a beef packing plant. Like, I have gone through like the beginning. I've been on feedlots. I've been on actually one of the largest feedlots in the state of Nebraska. It's huge. And I went into it thinking, gosh, am I going to like have a little bit of qualms? Because I don't buy my beef from the grocery store. Obviously, it's my own beef. It goes to our local locker and then into my freezer. And I'm very blessed in that way. So I can't even count. I can probably count on the amount of times on my hand that I bought in grocery store beef. But so I was thinking, gosh, am I going to have, seeing this really large, like 100,000 head, beef feedlot, am I going to be like, ooh, yeah, we really have, a lot of areas to improve and some things to do different and take a little bit of a different stance. But I really left being like, wow, they're doing a phenomenal job at agriculture at scale. And I felt very, very comfortable with everything I saw in that, that large beef feedlot. And so I just have seen so much of the beef industry and been so involved in it that everyone listening, as Tara said, like grocery store beef is not bad. If you want to buy directly from a rancher, amazing. Like ranchers who are doing direct consumer beef, it goes a really long way in supporting them and supporting the American farmer rancher in that aspect. So I feel safe telling everyone, or feel good telling everyone, that like wherever you're buying your red meat, your beef, you're getting it from a really good, high quality source. And I just don't have the personal experience to say that about poultry, I guess.
Natalie said she's toured the largest feedlot in Nebraska. I've toured the largest cheese plant in the world. So listen, I feel good about cheese too. Okay. I can't say it about feedlots, but I can say when I saw those 600-pound blocks of cheese, I was like, please, more cheese.
Where is that?
Hey, it's actually located in New Mexico, so it's not far down from us, and it is massive. It processes a lot of cheese, and I think it gets to a conversation of that Natalie and I with our podcast. One of the things that we set out with the intent of doing is we never want to tell people what to buy. Our thing has always been food choice, and let us just like tell you about these different things, give you as much information as we can, and then you figure out what you want to do with that information. Instead of, I think we're in a movement of like food influencers standing in the grocery store with like holding a product saying, don't buy it, or you have to buy it, or you've got to buy this, or don't buy this. And I think it leaves consumers with a ton of fear and just confusion. And instead it's like, let me just tell you about these at their most basic core of what I know about them. And then you make that decision.
Yeah.
And to answer, this will answer without answering your question of like, which one should I buy, or is beef worse or better? I think what this whole conversation lends it to is the more you are involved in the food system, the more trust you have in the food system. So I really get why people who are very removed from, the beginning stages of farming and food production have questions about it. I mean, I remember watching Seaspiracy for the first time and being like, well, crap. Like, am I not supposed to be eating shrimp because I have not been out on a fishing boat. I have not been. Like, I have a lot of questions about the seafood industry because I know nothing about it. So I was an absolute consumer watching that. And I remember thinking, gosh, do I need to change this? What is true? What isn't? But at the end of the day, like Tara said, I've never been in a, chicken plant, but I still buy it because she's been in all the other plants. She has a brother that farms potatoes. She knows a neighbor that farms this. I know someone who does this. And I have absolute trust in every single person of the connection I have in the food system. So I don't worry about the things that I haven't been. Like, I don't worry about chicken and that I haven't been in a chicken plant because I have been in a beef one, and because I do know someone who does that. And so it's like once you get your foot just a little bit into the food system, you start realize you just feel a little bit safer. And then you don't have those broad questions that you have when you're just completely removed from it. Even though you don't have the facts, it's like, I have the trust there.
Yeah. That's why I love podcasts so much. I always tell people, like, if I didn't know what I was doing with training and nutrition, I wouldn't be able to talk about it for an hour straight on a podcast by myself every week for the last, I don't know how many years now. You guys wouldn't be able to talk about what you talk about with different people asking you questions, answering questions online, busting myths that you see on social media every time you do a podcast. Like, anybody who can talk at length on a topic probably knows a good amount, versus the person that shoots a quick video on their phone in the store with an apple saying that there's something poisonous about it. And who is this person? It's just a TikTok reel that they swipe and see, It drives me nuts. But that's why I love what you guys are doing. So I have one final question to kind of wrap us up on. And there's no, obviously, right answer here that I'm looking for.
You're like, I'm not going to ask you guys for an answer because I've learned at this point. We're an hour in and you haven't given me
Don't
one.
expect anything. Make America healthy again. Just your guys' overall thoughts. I've been asked about this plenty of times, and there's multiple, obviously there's certain parts of it that probably relate directly to you. There's certain parts that don't. So answer what does relate to you. I've been asked the same thing numerous times, and I've said, I think, my opinion is overall, if we're trying to make America healthy, and that's a really good thing, we should probably do that. We're fat and unhealthy, so let's not be. But there's also a lot that isn't 100% proven by research, so I'm not going to support everything, But for what does apply to your guys' world, I would love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions.
Yeah, I think overall, I really love, as what you said, the messaging. Like, I think anything that is making people ask where their food is coming from, that is getting them curious about what's going into their food, is actually a great thing. Like, as a farmer, and I would say I speak for Natalie as a rancher, like, ask away, ask us these questions, be curious, come out to the farm. I actually feel so confident that I feel like if people came out to farms, visited farms, they would feel a sense of relief and not a sense of being like fearful or, whatever, like the opposite extreme. I think that every time we do a tour, people leave feeling so good about dairy farming. And so just knowing that experience, I'm like, heck yeah, like let's open up this conversation. Let's be more transparent. I think where I struggle with is probably kind of similar maybe to you, is some of the things that they talk about and some of the like rabbit holes they go down don't always have the most like accurate information. And I think that's doing a disservice because it almost like discredits all of the good work whenever you lead with something that's like maybe misrepresented. I would also love to see more farmer input on that. I think a part of the Make America Healthy Again is very much like a certain type of farming that meets a certain criteria. And I feel like they're discounting a lot of farming out there that's doing a really good thing and a lot of farmers that are producing really great foods. And so that would be kind of my challenge for it would be to dig a little deeper maybe on the farming side and explore that more. But I think the ultimate goal is really positive.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about MAHA, we have talked about this like at length on our podcast. And so if you are someone who likes to hear discussion on this, you would definitely enjoy tuning into Tara and I every Thursday, because you can't avoid MAHA in today's food landscape. As much as we try to, we're like, okay, we're back with another, whether it's a MAHA activist or influencer, RFK Jr., or like whatever it is just seeped into the conversation. And I would agree with you guys. I think it's been really cool to see. I think it has shifted from 2020, where we were in 2020, with everything that went on, obviously shifted, people's interest in food. But think about where we were with, people's knowledge and quest and desire to be reconnected to a farmer and rancher before kind of this movement. And I think it has really done great lengths to change that and make it, make it cool again, to know where your food is from and eat healthy and all this stuff. Do I think MAHA is actually the answer to the food system? I don't. And one thing we just talked about on the podcast recently is that out of MAHA has almost come like this MAHA 2.0, where these people, these moms, these everyday people were like, yes, I want limited dyes. I want all of these things. And then MAHA almost took it to an extreme where they lost the reality, like the actual functioning capability of your everyday American to be quote unquote healthy again. And so I feel like there's this kind of movement coming out of MAHA that's like, they're not labeling themselves anything, but it's like this different MAHA group that like has the foundation, the idea, the drive to shop healthier, eat healthier, be healthier, but they have maybe a little bit more realistic foundation and approach to it than quote unquote the original, like, main MAHA people. And so I have a lot of faith that the MAHA movement has actually brought something really, really great to the food landscape by kind of creating this, like, I don't know, positive, realistic conversation around food. And I think that's what we need. The answer to the food system in the future is nothing in the past, or else we would have stayed there. So people who are like, I want to go back to how our ancestors ate, or I want to go back to farming how we did in the 1900s. It's like, that didn't work. And that is not going to work for today's society. So going back is not going to work. It's like a new innovative approach we need to the food landscape to get it to where we want, that farmers are happy with it, that consumers are happy with it. And that's going to take like a new dialogue and direction. And I'm praying that will actually come out of MAHA, even though it isn't, the core MAHA like requirements or decisions.
Yeah, I love it. I think those are both great answers. I think there's certain aspects of it that really work people up and get people triggered. And I think in general, I think people just need to be comfortable having conversations without it turning into arguments. And then you can learn a lot more. Be more open-minded and you actually can learn, because they shut off to some of what you guys are saying because something about a vaccine pissed them off and now everything is bad. And it's like, well, it realistically should be categorized into like 20 different subcategories of making America healthy. And like, let's talk about each individual one with an expert in each individual area, not just one person, But anyway, this has been unbelievable. I feel like I've learned a ton. I love talking about this, even though I'm completely removed from that world, but it's just such a good topic. And I also think that people listening are going to learn a lot that is going to apply to them, because a lot of really fresh minds to this topic are listeners of this podcast. So thank you guys for coming on. I know you guys have a podcast, social media. If you guys can just tell us where to find all that real quick, that would be great before we wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, we've dropped a few things about our podcast, but you can find us on Discover Ag anywhere you get your podcast. And every week we cover 4 to 5 articles that are kind of trending. We say articles, it can be reels, it can be any type of media essentially that people are consuming that is touching on food and agriculture. And we kind of try to break it down to its core. There is information, but we also have a lot of fun. It is also entertaining. It is not all like hard hitting facts. We try to weave in pop culture through everything that we do and cover that. So you can definitely find us over there. Natalie, you want to share about our socials?
Yeah, it's just Discover Ag, and we're on Instagram. We just recently started putting up our YouTube videos. So if you're a YouTube consumer, you can find us over there. And then we also have personal channels. So if you're like, man, it sounds cool to understand a little bit more about the beef industry through a beef family, or, the dairy industry through a dairy family, you can find us at Natalie Kovarik on most platforms and at Vander Dussen on most platforms.
Perfect. I'll link all that in the description of this podcast. Thank you guys for spending some time with me and doing this interview.
Thanks for having us
we're honored.
on.
Thank you.